is up, YouTube? This is episode 28 of the 5D Warrior Podcast. As always, I'm Corey, here with
John. How's it going, guys? Thanks for tuning in.
As always, we are getting into all things God, consciousness, mind, and creation today. I'm going to be drawing a little bit from A Course in Miracles. So I'm going to start us off with a quote that reads, "Think honestly what you have thought that God would not have thought, and what you have not thought that God would have you think. Search sincerely for what you have done and left undone accordingly, and then change your mind to think with God's. This may seem hard to do, but it is much easier than trying to think against it. Your mind is one with God's. Denying this and thinking otherwise has held your ego together, but has literally split your mind." And that's very profound, and it's hard to unpack. But I think what it's getting at is that we are living in the imagination of God, and that your mind is not separate from God in a sense. And we've seen our world through the lens of duality, and we forgot that we live in creation and oneness.
Yeah, and I think it says there, like, the ego splits the mind, right? And I think, like you said, the ego is what gives us the polarity and duality in this third dimension. But what it's really saying is that we are the creation of God. We are God's creators. We are just a part of God, infinitely creating to then give him intelligence or information back to the source, right? So we are that God mind. And what is happening here in this dimension is we gain self-awareness, but with that self-awareness, we gain ego. And that ego makes everything outward and external from ourselves and gives us a sense of separateness rather than singularity. So I think what it's saying is that ego divides our mind rather than looking at everything from the God mind and the oneness mind in a sense, right?
No, that makes a lot of sense. And the ego, like you said, divides. And the ego does whatever it can to survive, because think of the Holy Spirit on one shoulder and then the ego on the other, like the angel and the devil, and how a lot of people think. And the ego is an entity in itself that it feeds on your mind and your thoughts. And when you feed the ego through this life, through separation, is what the ego feeds on, essentially. And the ego likes to see others not do well. The ego likes to see you do better than the others because it gives you that sense of self. But when you stop feeding the ego, you start to see the harmony in life and the flow of it all.
Yeah, and you just talk about feeding the ego in the sense, think of your ego as like a little kid that needs food, right? A little kid that's just running around all day, making fun of other people, putting people down to make themselves feel better because they don't know any better, right? And it's not that the ego doesn't know any better. That is the ego's only job. And the ego doesn't even really exist because that angel and that devil on your shoulder don't really exist. It's just a figment of our imagination that we create, that the ego helps us create to then weigh the odds of our actions, right? So there's a lot of talk in the spiritual community about letting that ego go. And by letting it go, you start to see, like Corey said, the harmony in everything, the oneness in everything. You start to experience the singularity of this dimension rather than experiencing the duality and the polarity of this dimension when you're constantly feeding that little kid or that ego, right? You just got to stop feeding that ego. And like the quote says, live as if you're in God's mind. And I talked about this one time. Why not try gamifying God consciousness, in the idea that even if you don't believe in all of this stuff, if you woke up every day and just like kind of like gamified your consciousness, and you woke up every day acting as if you were God, and you started giving love to everything and everyone, sooner or later I think your reality would become much greater, because you're putting out, when you see yourself as God, you can only put out positive energy, I would like to think.
It would become much more prosperous too. Like, do you think that God has an ego? Do you think God created the world and the universe and said, "Oh, look at me"? Like, no. I would like to think not. I think that God did it strictly out of selflessness and didn't do it with the ego. He did it strictly out of love and out of creation. I have another quote here on the ego, and it says, "Perceived without your part in it, God's creation is seen as weak, and those who see themselves as weakened do attack. The attack must be blind, however, because there is nothing to attack. Therefore, they make up images, perceive them as unworthy, and attack them for their unworthiness. That is all the world of the ego is. Nothing. It has no meaning. It does not exist. Do not try and understand it, because if you do, you are believing that it can be understood and therefore capable of being appreciated and loved. That would justify its existence, which cannot be justified. You cannot make the meaningless meaningful. This can only be an insane attempt." And this book talks a lot about the insanity of your own mind, because one who believes the ego is one who is insane, because the ego's creations are miscreations. They're not real.
It's the grand distortion.
Exactly. It's all an illusion, because when you think about it, this world is an illusion. We won't get off on a tangent, but obviously we live in a light matrix, and everything is just solid matter. Solid matter is literally just light that's very concentrated. Our bodies, this earth,
very dense energy.
very dense energy, exactly. So we're perceiving this illusion of solid matter in the world that we assign meaning to, and then our mind is miscreating these perceptions, judgments, and labels that we assign to things, and cause our own suffering.
Yeah, and it says, what's it? Let me see that.
Here you go.
Where is it say?
It's right there, that paragraph.
Therefore, they make up images, perceive them as unworthy, and attack them for their unworthiness. That is all the world of the ego is. Nothing. It has no meaning. It does not exist. Do not try to understand it, because if you do, you are believing that it can be understood and therefore capable of being appreciated and loved. That would justify its existence, which cannot be justified. You cannot make the meaningless meaningful. This can only be an insane attempt. And what I think it's saying here is that the ego is meaningless, because when you choose to believe that the ego is real, you give meaning to everything else that is external from yourself. And when it's saying it's meaningless, is it saying that it's meaningless because there is nothing that is external of yourself. Everything just is you. Everything just is God. Everything is just an outward manifestation of yourself. So when you buy into the ego, you then give meaning to things. You give meaning and identify things that don't even, they have no meaning, because you're only giving them meaning with your own thoughts and your own mind, and that is of something that an insane person would do.
Exactly. We're thinking about a false future or a false past, and we're constantly creating misperceptions of what happened before and what's going to happen. Meanwhile, we forget what this moment brings us now, and at the end of the day, this moment is always perfect, and you're alive, you're breathing. God bless, thank God that you are, but
thank yourself.
Thank myself for breathing, and just feel the love in each moment. And like, we had Eric on again, and I'll say it again, like, the subtleness of the moment has been the most profound thing that I think I've heard in quite some time. And just feeling like the wind and the air temperature, the pressure in the air, how you're sitting on your chair, your spine alignment, where your tongue sits in your mouth, and just learning to appreciate and love it all.
Very like little minimal things that like we don't even think about, right? Like, I'm moving my hands while I'm talking right now, and there was that thing that Eric did with us on the podcast where it's just, I guess you can consider it qigong, because like you're aware of where you're just like, he told us to raise our arms, right, and then just drop them. But then he told us to raise our arms and just like allow the energy, in a sense, to raise your arms and not really think about it. And like, it's way more meaningful when you do it like this, because like now I could feel that energy in my hand.
You could feel the chi, and
you could feel the chi. Yeah,
exactly. When I've been doing my qigong now, I've been focusing on, I was doing a lot of my movements with the muscle in my body, and I wasn't understanding like what the practice was. And then when I started to understand that it's the mind moving the body, not the body moving the body, it becomes such a different energetic practice.
Yeah, and going back to that concept where we were letting our minds move our hands, not just like moving them or whatever. I was watching a TikTok with a hypnotist, right? And the hypnotist, he was like, I could hypnotize you in 3 minutes through this TikTok video, whatever. So I close my eyes. He says, raise your hands. He says, turn your left palm up, and then essentially you're like this. And then he said, your eyes are closed. You're just listening to his voice, because with your eyes closed, your senses become more heightened, like, right? So he says, feel as if there's a pile of books weighing down your hand. So I'm feeling this pile of books, like, and it slowly is like dragging my hands down my hand down, because I'm envisioning all of this energy like on my hand. Then he says, imagine there's a bunch of balloons tied to your middle finger on your right hand. So now I got my mind slowly moving this hand down because I'm envisioning all these books, and I have my middle finger slowly raising my arm up because I believe that there's all these balloons. And I was laying in my bed for like 3 minutes, just like trying to see if this guy could like hypnotize me in a sense. And like he was, because like my mind was fully in belief, like I was fully envisioning these books and these balloons. And I opened my eyes, and my hand's like all the way up here, and this hand's like all the way down here.
And you probably,
And like I could obviously feel it, like
yeah.
that it obviously wasn't real, but like I felt like the energy pulling my hand up and pulling this hand down.
Like at the end of the day, they say, like it says in the book, like all is mind, and like you create this reality, like you created that experience for yourself. I have another quote from here if you want to go into
Let's
it.
dive into A
yeah,
Course in
so-
Miracles.
So let me explain this book briefly. So A Course in Miracles, if you haven't read it, it's kind of a compilation of, it had a few different authors in a sense of people who created it, but the main person whose teachings this was actually an atheist. But she started hearing a voice in her head, sort of like a schizophrenic. And eventually she realized that that voice was giving her like profound meaning in her life. And so she started to write everything down. And what it claims is that this book is dictated by the entity known as Jesus, right? So essentially this woman had a soul or entity speaking through her as Jesus, as we know. And this book is essentially written through the voice of Jesus. So it's very profound, and all the teachings relate very closely to Christianity, but almost with like a spiritual, more oneness twist on it, and it's the true meaning of Christianity rather than worshiping any false idols or anything. So it really allows you to tap into that oneness consciousness and understand the ego, understand the kingdom of heaven being within, understanding that the miscreations of the mind and the creation of God that we get to enjoy. So here, I'll give you another one, and this pertains to your duty as a human, almost like incarnate on this planet.
This is the first time I'm hearing this too, so I'm gonna give my analysis straight off the dome.
So if you do not extend the kingdom, you are not thinking with your creator and creating as he created. Being a perfect accomplishment, the sonship can only accomplish perfectly, extending the joy in which it was created and identifying itself with both its creator and its creations, knowing they are one. Reality cannot be partly appreciated. That is why denying any part of it means you have lost awareness of all of it.
Yeah, so just off of that, what I essentially think that is saying is that we are not experiencing the Creator's creation. We are supposed to be experiencing the Creator and constantly creating. And every creation is not, there's no such thing as a bad creation. Because what it's saying, I think, is that all creation is perfect in the Creator's mind. Because anything that you can create in this physical dimension is perfect. Because all that we're put here to do is create, whether that be labeled as good or bad, it's still a creation. And I think what that's saying is there's no such thing as an imperfect creation if you're creating through the God consciousness and the oneness consciousness.
Yeah, well, I think in a sense that even nothing is a bad creation, not only just through oneness consciousness, but think about your words as a creation. So no matter what you're saying, you're creating through the voice of God. Like this body was created by God, so these words are of God as well, no matter what you're saying. and you think about the yin and the yang, the balance, like there's always going to be the perception of duality in this universe. But I think that at the end of the day, if you tap into the positive energy, the good, it'll outweigh the bad. But in terms of creation, I think that the kingdom is the creation, and you have the ability to extend that kingdom. So through your creations, you can then add to this. So whether it be painting, guitar, hiking is a creation, creating that path through the woods, or
Anything,
build
really.
anything that you do, this incarnation is your creation. And we talk about the tree and the trunk of the tree being the body, and then the branches extending and being the archetypal creative expression of that tree. And like in
Right.
that same sense, like this body is your trunk, and everything that you do, these words you say and these books you read and these relationships you build, is all your creation in this
Yeah,
life.
that goes back to what Eric was talking about. The tree experiences itself as, and it uses its tree-ness to experience, right? So our job as the creator, and it's hard for us because, again, that ego comes into play. We're not simply being. We're essentially human beings, but we're more so humans nowadays because we're not at our true essence of being. And we have to experience our humanness, and that humanness is our creation. And all things that we are creating is us experiencing our humanness, because like a tree is creating, it's growing up through the trunk, it's branching out, creating its leaves, but that's all the tree can really do, right? It can't do anything else besides be a tree. We have the ability with our thumbs, our hands, like
And
everything,
this mind we're blessed
our
with.
minds, to pretty much there's no such thing, I think, in this dimension that is impossible to create. I really don't believe that, but we're just experiencing this humanness, and our humanness is just us creating, right? So we have to, our job as the God consciousness, as God, is to experience his creation and create in this dimension, to then when we pass on, hopefully give that good information back to source. So then one day when our soul's journey comes to an end, which
I
it
don't think it truly ever
never
comes to an
ends,
end.
it will never end, but we will just essentially create our own reality, our own galaxy, our own universe, in a sense, is what I believe. And that, I think, aligns with everything going on a spiritual consciousness path.
We create in small scale in this world, and the trees create in small scale, and these second density animals create on a very small scale. And we've had the ability to create on a much larger scale. Think of cities, and think about the society we've built, and these books and religions that have come from humanity. We're going to space, but then think about what higher density incarnation, what type of creation that they would create. Would it be a planet? Would it be a solar system? Would it be a galaxy? I'd like to think that's the case, because I don't think that at any point that creation stops, and I think that the universe is infinitely large but also infinitely small. So there's creation at every level of this universe.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think what the Course in Miracles is a speaking to through Jesus, right? It's essentially his voice. And Jesus was the definition of God in this reality, right? But not God as separate from us. He was the only person on the planet at the time, still probably to this day, one of the only ones to experience that full unconditional love. Because I believe he came from a higher density of consciousness and then came back down here to spread that unconditional love that is of the fourth dimension, right? And there's a bunch of different quotes in the Bible, and I'm sure in that book, that expresses Jesus' words. But like at the time, the people on the planet weren't conscious enough to understand what Jesus was saying, right? He said, he didn't say, I'm the only son of God. He said, we're all sons of God. And people like don't really understand what that means, especially back in the day. People are still struggling with that saying right now. And I think what that means is we're all sons of God in the sense, and it says we're all images of God. So we're all just like all God, playing God in this dimension, and our only job is to experience unconditional love. And that's what Jesus was experiencing. And there's another aspect to Jesus is that people believe that Jesus was born. If you believe in Jesus, people were born. He was born, and then like he just like had all these like powers, right? Like Jesus was obviously they knew from birth that Jesus was king. He was a special baby, but he wasn't healing people when he was 5 years old. He had to go on his lost years, the 18 years where Jesus was just missing, right? He went to Egypt. He studied at mystery schools in Egypt. He went to Tibet. He studied the books of the Tibetans, right? He went to India. He studied the mystic arts. He studied Reiki healing, all this stuff, and then he comes back into the Bible in the New Testament and shares these messages, and no one understands them.
And he's deified.
And he's deified. He is deified as God because we deify anything that is more powerful than us as God. And we could even get into how we deify politicians, our government, celebrities. I heard something. This is pretty crazy. Think about this, right? This has nothing to do with that, but this is pretty crazy. What do we say when we go to school every day? I don't know if you say the Pledge of Allegiance in kindergarten, but I can remember saying it in first grade onward, right? Every single day. What do we say? We pledge allegiance under God to the United States of America. I saw this on Fox News. And what he's saying is, we've been subconsciously programmed to deify the state. We're speaking under God. We're not pledging our allegiance to God. We're pledging our allegiance to the state. So we've been subconsciously programmed to depend on the state, to deify the state through our elementary school, middle school, high school journey, like our 18 years in the public education system.
And that's a prayer in a sense. And a lot of people don't even pray. And that's their mantra, their
You're
prayer of the day is the Pledge of Allegiance to this governmental power.
Yes, I saw that, and I was trying to explain it to my dad. He really wasn't understanding, but it's like as soon as I heard him say it, I was like, wow, that's actually so crazy. Like, why was that written like that? It should be, I pledge allegiance maybe under the United States of America to God, not the other way around.
Yeah, because it also brings about that separation of like, okay, I pledge my allegiance to this state.
Something else.
But what about these other countries that we're also, this globe, like we're all just one consciousness, and we're separating ourselves by nations and sovereign like states. Like it just doesn't make any sense.
Isn't that crazy though?
No, that is crazy.
Like I saw that and I
didn't even think about it.
I've never thought about it either. And I saw that and I was like, wow, that's insane. But that goes back to like this book and how we deify Jesus and we deify anything that's external from us. But we're only deifying that because that's a projection of ego in a sense. Mm-hmm. That like our ego feels maybe smaller than Jesus at the time because like we don't understand his capabilities and his cities, right? We talk about the Hindu cities, like the powers that Jesus had. Our ego doesn't understand that, so then we project that as him being God. But he was just at a higher state of consciousness.
He understood that he was the Son of God, but as are we. And a lot of people forget the as are we part, because not only is he the Son of God, but he talks about the kingdom of heaven being all. And in this book especially, they discuss like the creation and how the kingdom of heaven is the grass and the trees and it's inside of you, and you just need to find it within yourself. And the kingdom of heaven is not a magical place in the sky. So I just posted a TikTok about gurus and what is a guru, right? And a guru is a realized being who has abandoned the ego and that sense of self and became one with the all. And they're not a man, they're not a woman, they're not even a person, but they're just simply a being incarnate on this earth. And they channel that voice of God, if you will, in a sense of they speak only truth and they don't speak out of duality. So a perfect example of a guru is our boy Jesus, right? So Jesus spoke in parables. Jesus spoke profoundly, and he understood the oneness within everything and the love ever present in this universe. And he tried to express that with words that people did not understand. And like we said, those words led to him being deified in our world. But there are many other gurus, and you look at people like Maharaji, and you look at even like people like Sadhguru. I wouldn't say he's like fully a realized being, but he has very profound statements that he always.
He just goes by Sadhguru.
Exactly.
But that's another type of guy that people deify.
Exactly. People would deify that.
When you go into India and like you talk about Sadhguru, people look at Sadhguru as if he's like a walking god in a sense, and it's like
I think he's more of a Western, Eastern teacher. I feel like, is he in India with like a large following? I'm not quite sure.
That's where he's from.
No, I know he's from India.
Yeah, but they look at him like he's the shit.
Really?
Yeah, but he's been on this. Sadhguru's been on this stuff since he's like our age or younger.
Really?
When he had like I forget his story. He was in a well or something. He fell in a well, something. I don't remember. He was talking about it on Joe Rogan. But his mentor or someone, he was like, I don't really remember. I'm definitely messing this up. You could look it up on Joe Rogan. But he was like pissed that he was like stuck in this hole.
Yeah.
And his mentor was someone like I think like left him in the hole and was like, there's no reason for you to be like mad, bro. Like you just like this is where you're supposed to be at like right now. And like I think he like I'm butchering the story, but like he came to terms with it, and then like ever since then like his mentor knew that he was like different than the other children from when he was a young boy, and then so he like followed this path, and he went on to become Sadhguru. That's not his real name.
Yeah, no, obviously all these gurus, and think about Ram Dass too. Like his real name is Richard Alpert, right? So Ram Dass was the man who studied under Maharaji and really brought spirituality, in a sense, to the West through the LSD studies at Harvard, which he was banned for, kicked out of Harvard. But he ultimately, with his lectures and his teachings and the Eastern philosophy, he brought a sense of consciousness into the West, which is something we miss, and that's something that we don't teach in school or in Christianity and Judaism and all that stuff. So, like, just understanding consciousness and how this conscious universe is just consciousness interacting with other consciousness.
Yeah, and if we want to bring it full circle, we could talk about how we were discussing ego and how the ego splits the mind, yada yada, and that is what gives us the grand distortion in this dimension, right? Because we have full self-awareness, that's where the ego comes from. But then there's people like Sadhguru, who even on Joe Rogan podcast, Joe Rogan was like, well, you would say some things are bad, right? And Sadhguru said, no, nothing is good nor bad. And Joe Rogan was like, the fuck, bro? Like obviously stuff is bad, because Joe Rogan was talking about the manipulation of governments, all this stuff. Sadhguru works with the World Economic Forum, and unfortunately, I feel like for Sadhguru, he may be manipulated by these like governmental powers, because he sees the oneness in everyone, he sees the love in everyone, and like I think he gets a bit of a distortion thrown in his good character by like these entities that don't necessarily like mean well, and the ego comes back into place with like Jesus, who obviously Jesus must have had an ego in this dimension, but he fully like let it go, because he was just a being of unconditional love. Like he was born, and I'm sure young Jesus had problems, had to battle his ego, and he had to go to those schools that taught him to fully let it go, right?
Yeah.
And that's like that is like the journey of this incarnation right here, is the journey of becoming that being, right? That full unconditional love being, that seeing the oneness in everything and everyone, and dissolving that ego.
Yeah, this third density incarnation is a learning platform for the soul, in a sense of you come to live in this body on this world to realize why you're here. And it's until you realize why you're here, you continue to reincarnate here.
Yeah.
And like we said in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, and we'll get into this in another podcast, but the Tibetan Book of the Dead talks about the bardo and passing on and leaving this reincarnation cycle and moving on to something greater, because there are many levels to this reality,
There's
and this
levels
is just
to this
one.
shit.
There's levels to this shit.
Yeah, but and what does Dolores Cannon say, right? The Earth is like soul kindergarten or something.
Yeah,
Like, or soul
exactly.
preschool. Something like this is like the very beginning of
Exactly.
of our soul's journey.
And it's also the shortest part of our soul's journey, because it's the most strenuous. Because the ego is what causes your suffering,
I
but
want
you're
to look
not
up that quote.
you're not suffering outside of a third density incarnation. You're not suffering in a sense, because like the ego is not there to allow you to suffer. So this incarnation, according to the law one, you continue this cycle for approximately, I think it was 72,000 years. But all the other ones are millions and millions of years of just birth and rebirth, death and rebirth.
I can't find it, but Dolores Cannon says the Earth School is the most difficult in the universe. Only the bravest souls sign on for this assignment.
That's true, because suffering is daunting, and you essentially, when you choose to incarnate here, you're choosing to suffer. But that suffering is all a learning experience, and that's what pain and distraught and anger, all of it is just if you look at it as a tool to learn from, it takes a lot of the meaning away from it.
Yeah, and that's all true, and that's like another part of we were talking about the creation in the beginning, where all of those negative emotions, well, nothing's negative or positive emotion. It's all just the raw chi that we've discussed, the raw energy, and we identify it with
those low vibrational emotions.
We identify it with, oh, this is high vibe emotion, this is low vibe emotion, but that is just part of the creation, right? And that is us experiencing this creation of the third dimension as God, to then give him this information back to source, back to the infinite consciousness, the infinite creator, as you would.
Because at the end of the day,
oh, I'm bleeding.
We are just, where are you bleeding from?
See, pain. We have pain in this
dimension. Sit with it. That's on the other foot.
Is it?
It looks like it.
No, I'm bleeding here.
Oh well. So
hey,
sit with it. I said it to you yesterday. We were coming home from work. I said, damn, I'm so hungry right now. You're like,
shut up.
I'm about to go home and eat. And then I said, I'm just going to go sit in the grass in my backyard and sit with my hunger. And you were like, and wow. I was like, you're the only one who would get that. Because like a lot of people don't understand, like when you can sit with discomfort and pain, that it actually helps ease it. And that's the whole thing with the ice baths, which is a whole other ordeal. But
shout out Wim Hof.
Shout out Wim Hof.
Always.
As always.
But yeah, just embracing pain, because pain doesn't exist. It's another thing that we just like
miscreate.
We miscreate. It's a distortion that we say, "Oh, this hurt me." It didn't hurt. What if?
Because this isn't you.
What if you said this felt good? What if I stubbed my toe and I said, instead of saying, "Oh," I said, "Oh yeah," and I embraced it. Right? It's all just like giving the meaning. And when you say those things, like it's gonna hurt way more if I say, "Oh shit, that really hurt," versus, "Oh yeah." And Eric talks about the anger, right? Like. And energy transmutation, like why not? Anger is derived from passion, so why not observe that anger, but why not try and get as angry as possible, and like not in a physical sense where you're like so mad, but like try to like channel all that anger, all that passion, and then use it for something positive. I think that's a good note to wrap this up on.
Yeah, I agree, because at the end of the day, we're just infinite souls in finite bodies in this infinite universe. Though this is the launching ground. This is like the jump pad of the soul. So we hit the earth and we're off into the universe, into the infinite universe,
into the infinite creator. And always remember that we are just the creator experiencing this reality, separate from all other selves, right? But we're not separate from all other selves. There's just 8 billion souls on this planet who are experiencing God consciousness in 8 billion different ways. Right?
This is true.
And our only job is to create and then give that information back to the infinite.
Exactly. But the only thing that's not infinite
is time on this podcast. Good riddance, brothers and sisters.
We got a call out. We're calling out Jeff Bezos today.
Okay.
We haven't called out Jeff Bezos yet. All right, so Jeff Bezos, he's pushing this corporate agenda. He's monopolizing.
Technocrat.
He's a technocrat. He's monopolizing this industry, putting small businesses out of order with this huge Amazon corporation that's taking over the world in a sense. He's now trying to go to space. I don't
What's
like
he need
it.
to go to space for?
Yeah, why does he need to go to space?
He's gonna take over space? No, I don't think so.
I don't think so.
We won't allow that.
We're not allowing him to take over space. But anyways,
Thanks for watching.
thank you.
Like and
So
subscribe.
grateful.
Tune into the next podcast.
And check out our merch. We don't have it on today. We got the merch in the bio. Add an A. We're watching you, YouTube.